Hi, welcome to Making Potions blog 15, I think. Today I'm going to talk about a dialogue system, and this is a dialogue system that I implemented and then reworked to be able to pull dialogue from a table instead of having to hard code it. So hopefully this will be really helpful. I know that there's a lot of dialogue solutions out there, but I made my own from scratch and I'm pretty happy with it. There's some improvements I want to make and I'll talk through that. So first I wanted to define what my dialogue system would be like, and I decided I wanted to not just have text, just character text, but I also wanted to have the character's profile as well, and hopefully going forward expressions. Um, my initial implementation of this, let's pull it up. I don't have an example. If you look through past videos, I think that comes up. But my initial implementation was to do this all hard coded. So let me pull up in Visual Studio here. So I commented this out because it is broken now with my new dialogue system. But I can show you. So here I had an overall dialogue struct. I've changed what that is now. But I had which character would be appearing on the left, which character would be appearing on the right, and which character was talking. It turned out that I didn't think that having a character on both sides was very clear, so I ended up actually only rendering the talking character and then the text of what that character would be saying. So that system worked out all right. A really big difficulty with that system is that all of the text had to be coded in this struct system, and the way I added those text and dialogues to a scene I would take a file for that dialogue block and then attach that to a game object in the scene, and then it would run its own dialogue from there. Decided that was not the right way to do it. So I want to talk about my new dialogue system. Let me pull up what the dialogue system actually takes in. And it takes in CSVs, which you can actually create in Google spreadsheets. So in this CSV, I have a key for what I want to use to call the dialogue block. As you can see, here's like a block where there's 6 pieces of dialogue, but it's all triggered by 1. There's blank lines in between the different blocks, so I can have multiple different blocks of dialogue here. I have multiple files, CSVs of dialogue too, if I want to break them up. This is just the demo dialogue, but I also have things for tips and a Spider Queen boss fight and dialogue events that happen at home. Now, I still have the speaking character because that's obviously important. The speaking character actually renames, not only shows who's talking, but also renames the sort of name bar of the dialogue system to talk about that, or to show who's speaking. Then it has the line. As you can see, we actually have rich text implemented here. That's why we have like the color equals blue, color equals green. And actually led to some problems. And then this has where the characters are positioned. I decided I might want to have multiple characters on the side, so I have right side, left side, right side, and their expressions, which would be in the same order. Sound, there's some sound files that play in dialogue, and so if there's a sound that's supposed to trigger on a dialogue piece, if I just put the sound in here, it'll play. And then we have progress. And so progress is something that can either trigger an event or simply get saved in the progress system to let the game know that you've done something or you've seen something, and that might change how the game goes forward. For example, here when you're told, here it comes, pull those explosive potions back out, and told how to re-equip them. When you're finished with that dialogue, it saves the progress for the spider attack, and then a spider starts attacking, and so once you finish that dialogue, that's when the event occurs. And then for future use, I've decided to throw in a modification because, here, I'll show you. What I decided that would be really fun for the dialogue system, instead of just having a character with their name and text, and then another character with their name and text. That you'd have multiple characters on the side, and they'd move around and switch positions and have expressions. However, in some instances where the character is very far apart, it doesn't make sense to be showing them on the screen at the same time, and that's why I made the abrupt modification. I would prevent those characters from doing their normal switching around, which I haven't implemented yet, but so let me show you what my dialogue system looks like, and then we'll get into the code there. So here we go. So this is just sort of the first scene that you run into in the demo for potions. And I broke something. It's this. I didn't comment out enough, or I commented out. Ah. Whoops. I told you. Stuff just breaks it. I only kept this in to show you guys. All right. Here we go. Ta-da! Of course, it's going to take forever. There we go. So you can see we have the character appearing, their name appearing, and the text appearing as well. See, we have scrolling text here. And we have this instruction text with particular colors, the rich text as well. And then, if I do an event and I trigger more dialogue. Sorry, I realize that is quite loud. Hopefully you can be able to hear me. So as I was saying, we have the character who's speaking, we have their name, we have the lines that they're saying that actually scrolls across. You can also click to just auto show everything and then click to progress. And then triggered events at the end of dialogue and events triggering dialogue as well. So let me show you how I turned that CSV file into all of that stuff. So if I pull up my dialog manager here and show you Visual Studio. So here is my giant dialog manager. Now, the first thing that I had to include was this lovely little thing called CSV helper. I really don't like using libraries for the most part, but parsing CSVs can be a somewhat difficult task, especially because I don't know that I'm going to be getting all of my CSVs from Google Drive. Sometimes you get weird extra things when you get a CSV out of Excel. So I decided to use the CSV helper, and I'm using their CSV reader to parse that CSV. And what I'm parsing it into is into a bunch of dialog structs. So these contain basically the same information that the CSV does. I have them all as strings except for the expressions and the characters on the right and left side. I've made those arrays. And then let's just go through. And so when this all wakes up, it goes through the CSV file and it parses it line by line. And when it goes through the line, it just first of all grabs them. Grabs all of these fields. If you noticed in my CSV, I actually had the fields named. With CSV helper, you can grab the fields by their names. This means you don't have to worry necessarily about the order, even though they're probably going to be the same order. Make sure that you're grabbing the right field and sort of gives you that assurance instead of having magical numbers of what field it is. I grab most of them just straight up. For the left and right side, I made a function to parse strings into array. It's really simple. I don't use spaces, so I'm just splitting the inputs based on commas and then return it. So I almost don't need that function, but if I wanted to perhaps include spaces or make sure that I was checking to see if there were spaces, I would need to expand this function to make sure it works. So once I get all of those into this new dialog struct, I check to see if it's a null line. And so if it's a null line, we don't have a speaking character Then we know that it's a break in between those dialogues sections, like here. Boop. You can see that you'd be still pulling these lines with the CSV reader, and you have to identify them as separate sections. So what I'm doing with the dialog here is I'm pulling this all into one struct and putting this into a current dialog group. So it's a list of these, and I pull them one by one and build up this list into a block. And then when I go through this at the end, I'll assign it to the, so I assign each line to the new dialog. And then when I finish that dialog, I add it to my set of dialogues, which I call dialogues. And as you can see, I define that up here, and it is a dictionary. And the key for this dictionary is the string that is the key for each dialogue block. And then the list just is all those sets of dialogue. So if you notice here, I'm not actually pulling the key each time into the new dialogue structure. I'm only pulling I should actually. Okay. Yeah, so I'm actually pulling the key once, but I'm making sure that it doesn't change. And then if I do, I throw out some errors if there's a repeat key that already exists, etc. And so that's how I go through line by line and build this CSV into a dictionary of keys that I'm using to call the dialogue blocks, and then a list of those individual dialogue structures, with each of those being sort of a frame with the character talking and the text that they're saying, and potentially sounds that are playing during that time. Cool. So that's sort of the basic of how to get everything from the CSVs into a workable structure. I have a function here that I call grabbing stuff. This is just because when let me find this start dialog. I think it is start display dialog. Cool. So here we go. When a dialog section is called, when I want it to exist, I call a start display dialog function, which is a public function. Dialog manager here is a singleton, so I can call it from anywhere by using dialog manager .instance .start display dialog, and then the key of the dialog that I want to display. So here in the opening demo controller, you can see where I might be starting display of dialog places. Here you go, like start display dialog, wake up. And so that's the first thing that you saw, where Helios was saying, hey, wake up, Luna. Now, how this works is I have a cooldown timer here just to make sure that you don't accidentally click through dialog too quickly. This is a very small amount. I think it waits a quarter second in between dialog pieces. I enable the dialog canvas. And if you see here, all I do is I make sure that there's not a narrative canvas that already exists. And then I instantiate it. And I keep the reference to that. And then I grab the stuff in it. And that basically goes through and populates all of these important objects that I care about. The canvas itself, who's on the right and left images, since I don't have multiple images yet, the text, the instruction panel versus the dialog panel. You saw the instruction panel was in the middle, the dialog panel is at the bottom, the name panel and the text itself, since sometimes I'm going to be turning off the name panel when there's not name. And then I actually have a gradient that is shown as well. And it's very subtle. It just sort of gives you more focus on the characters instead of what's behind them. So I enable the canvas, grab all this stuff, and then I set the current dialog number to 0. And then I try to get the dialog. And I make sure that my character, people can't move around while dealing with dialog. So when I do the display dialog, no, you're in there. this is what goes through and renders everything on the screen. So I check the dialogue count if I am past, if I'm trying to display dialogue that doesn't exist, I return and don't try to display it. The current dialogue that it grabs is the number that it has of the dialogue series that has been set by that key. And then I have a special thing here. So if the character speaking is instruction, it turns off the instruction panel and turns on that, or it turns off the dialogue panel and turns on the instruction panel, and then shows you the instruction text. And it also removes the characters which may be on either side. Since normally I'm setting the characters down here, if I have an instruction, this is to just ensure that I'm not getting an instruction to do something while Helios or Granny is sort of just hanging out there on the side. Then this is pretty straightforward. I make sure that everything's active. I make sure if it's dialogue, since it's not an instruction, that the instruction panel is off. And then I have this place characters function. I will go into it next, but this is basically the placeholder for the more expanded version of the characters that I'd like to have, the character placement and movement. Then just I set the dialogue to the current dialogue line. I make sure that if the character exists, that I have their name panel up and the text. Now, the character names that are in the CSV aren't necessarily their final names, or they might not be spaced properly. If I have Mr. Muffet, I write him out as a single word, whereas I might want Mr. Dot Muffet or a space in there. So this makes sure to grab the character name from I have a character struct that keeps all of those, and I can show you that. And then I just play the sound if there's a sound attached to it. And if there's progress, there we go, my mic cut out. And if there's progress that's occurred, if there's progress in that CSV, let me show you what I'm talking about again. So here we have, if we have progress here, you can have progress in the middle of a scene or at the end of a dialogue struct. This just ensures that that is triggered. And actually, this is the on event. So what this does is allows me to trigger up functions that are run and called with this on event event, I guess. And I can show you that in Miss Buffett states. So here is where we set up a new event which can occur. This event that's getting so this event gets set up, and then when it gets called with the proper string, it will play this. So it gets called this on dialogue event gets, that's where it gets removed. It gets added here. So at the very start of this scene with Miss Muffet, this on dialogue event gets queued up, and then when dialogue ends that has the start battle string attached to it, the dialogue manager calls on event with that string, and this is the function that gets called in the string. If the string start battle, then you have all this audio stuff occur, and basically it's just like a very intense theme song that plays here upon that. Now, the progress actually gets called, when you're closing the dialogue system. And so here you have closed dialogue. The progress looks at the last dialogue that was presented, which is the last one in the dialogue block. If there is progress, it goes through and talks to the progress manager and adds progress, and then resets the progress to nothing. Cool. So here's the place characters that I was talking about. And this is, as I said, an initial draft of how I want to place the characters. This does a very simplistic version where it takes the character who's speaking and it basically makes them appear, and it starts with both the character sections clear, so only the character who's speaking gets rendered. And they get rendered on the appropriate side that they're supposed to be on. Yay! I do want to instead use a sort of character movement where you can give. Here, let me mimic here. So, for example, if I had two characters on one side and one of them was talking, they'd move slightly forward and then slightly back, and the other character moved forward and back if they were talking. If a new character came in, they'd sort of shuffle over and they would appear. Or if they want to switch sides, they'd actually move across the screen to the other side. And my artist, Wesley Eldridge or Prisma Slice, created a beautiful draft of the dialogue system working this way, but I would need to still implement the logic behind it. However, getting this dialogue system up and working with CSVs was the higher priority, and I think that placing these characters and creating all that character movement is going to be really sort of final polish that I add in towards the end. Now, taking you through the dialogue system, and I've shown you how we pull it from a CSV, how the characters are displayed, how the text is displayed, how we deal with progress and triggering of events that are set up through an event system. The one last thing that actually took a fairly decent amount of code to create is the scrolling of the characters, character by character, of like the lines of dialogue, the scrolling text. Now, initially, scrolling text is actually fairly easy to implement. You sort of pick, let me see. Scrolling text is fairly easy to implement because you just check every frame to make sure that should you be rendering another letter, and if so, render it. However, when you have rich text, that sort of throws a wrench into the whole thing. So let me show you. Don't mind my comments there. So here we have where I deal with the scrolling text, and I sort of do it timed so that I'm not creating 60 characters per second or whatever my frame rate is at currently. This is actually in a fixed update, so it would be probably that fast that it would be trying to render and add new ones. So I have a next letter time, and I just check the previous time and give it the next letter time. So I check by that with the scroll rate of the text. And then here is where the rendering really happens, is I take the text and I add it as the text that I want to render, and then the progress, the number of characters that I want to render. And so I start out with 0 and go up to the max amount of characters that can be rendered in this dialogue, and then increase that and render the next one next time around. So this clip symbol formatting, what you could do if you didn't have rich text is instead just take this string and sort of do the start from the beginning and go to whatever number you are. I know this isn't correct to dialogue spoken. I know that's not correct for C, but you just clip the string. However, when you have rich text, if you clip the string in the middle of a tag, or if you clip it after a tag that hasn't been closed, it breaks everything. Or you get weird rendering where you start rendering angle bracket, color equal red, and then clip that off instead of just rendering red text. So this is where you have to go through and check those characters and make sure that you're rendering them properly. So let's find this clip symbol formatting and we'll go through it. There you are. So here we have the clip symbol formatting. It takes in, as I said, that dialog line that you're looking to clip and the place that you want to clip it to. We have to track the tags. And we're going through and just sort of grabbing the brackets to make sure that we aren't clipping the text in the middle of the bracket, and the character length that we're counting are only characters that aren't in tags. So you don't want to clip a character, you don't want to count character length in the middle of tags, or else you'd have your text rendering character by character. You'd get to a tag and then it would either pause and then jump, or it would start rendering the tag. So that's why you need to only count the characters which aren't in the tags. So you just note when then there's a tag, you turn your bracket count up. If there's no bracket count, you count them. But if there is, you put it towards the tag count. And then when you find the close of the tag, you cut that off. So what I have here is I have the characters that you want to render. That's going to be the ones up to that length. And then the characters afterwards where you don't want them to show at all, and to clear them. So to clear things, you can set the character to the colors of the characters to hex of invisible 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. But the problem with this is that you have to be careful with those tags. So here I have in the toReturn a function that goes, it closes current tags. It checks to see that all the tags that are open are closed. Now, tags have to open and close in the order that they're set in, so they sort of stack up. If you haven't, worked with rich text before, or you're not super familiar with it, basically you're putting it on a stack, a pile. So if I had on my pile things that are characters are being rendered red, but then I had characters are being rendered black, I'd have to close the tag for the black before I could close the tag for the red. So that doesn't matter much when you're working with colors, because you're closing everything with a slash, or angle bracket slash color. But it does matter when you're working with something like bold. So if I did characters equals red and then characters, and then I put a bold characters, so I had like 3 red characters and then a bold red character. If I tried to close the color first before closing the bold, it just doesn't work, and so it renders the tags as actual characters, or it does something else really wonky. So I have to make sure that I close the bold first and then close the red. So you're sort of building up a stack and then pulling off. Now if you look at this this code, you can see that that's what I'm doing. So I'm building up a list of these tags in the order that I find them, much like the counting of the characters in this clip symbol formatting. I'm looking for the brackets. Now, if I find a closed bracket, or if I find a slash, which means it's a closing tag, I can remove the previous tag because, like I said, due to that stack, we know that the tag it's closing is going to be the one that was immediately before. So once we get through and build all of these up, then I can check to see if there's any tags left, and then I can go through and close them and throw all of these in sort of together. Now, I guess I could have done a function here where it takes in characters and it removes any, or it takes in the tag and adds a slash and removes anything after it equals or sign or after, because you have like equals 50 here. But if you put in a tag that says size equals 50, it breaks. I was lazy, and so instead I actually have just these if statements. These are the only types of rich format that Unity's UI system supports at a default. So if I wanted to use a different system with more rich text, I'd have to obviously rewrite this function. So this is how I take all the tags that are currently open and make sure that they're closed. And then I add that section to the clear section. Now, the same issue is with the clear is I don't want to have tags rendering colors or things in here, because if I have a color tag in the middle of this, I will suddenly get a red word or whatever color it is rendering in the middle. So I want to make sure that I'm removing all of the formatting there. And, that's actually really easy. I just go through, and if it exists in this, angle brackets, I pull them out. And that's how I get the dialogues cleared to do character by character rendering in a scrolling section. And this is one of those things that it adds really nice polish to the game, but people don't realize that you have to write 120 lines of code to do something like that. But I thought that this was a really cool, interesting challenge. Perhaps it was a little more on the polished side than I should be doing until the game content is perfectly created. But I thought that having a good, strong dialogue system is great. And obviously, I'm setting the character movement to the side for now. So that's how I do dialogue. I hope this was informative. I wanted to just share this with you guys, and I'll see you next time.